Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adrenal Fatigue Podcast. It's Danielle and Angela here today. And if you don't already know, the connection between the adrenals and the nervous system is very, very important. So important that if you don't learn to regulate your nervous system as part of your recovery, you might actually never fully recover. So one really important part of the nervous system we want to bring into the discussion today is one of our cranial nerves called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve has a very important job, which actually many important jobs, which we're going to dive into today. But a little preview is that this nerve is the only nerve in the body that allows you to decrease stress. And because the adrenals are the glands that help us respond to stress, this is really a must-have conversation.
Yes, it definitely is. I'm excited.
Yes, and the nervous system can really get complicated. So we are going to try to keep it simple for our discussion today. So maybe just starting with the basics, Angela, and we're so honored to just have you here to walk us through this really important topic. But what is the nervous system if we want to just kind of keep it high level to start?
Yes. So the nervous system makes up our brain, our spinal cord, and our nerves. And it's really the command center of the body. We can think about it as it pretty much guides everything that we do, from what we think to what we say, how we feel, and then what we do in response to those. So your nerves receive information from your environment, right? So you're scanning your environment, looking for social cues, facial expressions to figure out if your environment is safe, and then you react accordingly. And it's just really fascinating. And your nervous system affects, honestly, every aspect of your health, from your heartbeat to your digestion to sleep to your breathing patterns. So it's a big part, a really important part of this conversation.
When you were going through those points, Angela, it kind of reminded me of the saying, like, my nerves are shot. And when your nerves are shot, you just feel like everything is kind of setting you off.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Because
Which I
really
think a lot
there's
of our adrenal community could relate to.
absolutely, it's almost overload. And then our sensory, everything is an overload, and we really can't respond or problem solve from that space at all.
Yeah, and it almost becomes a vicious cycle, right? And we always say this too, when you're in a state of fight or flight, I mean, that is a whole reaction that deeply involves your nervous system. And it is a state that is naturally anxiety inducing. Like, you're meant to be anxious in those states and to look for all these different threats and different scenarios that you could
Exactly.
either fight or run away from. And so when you think about being in that state chronically, like, think what is happening to your nervous system to just chronically or constantly be there. That is
Right.
that's a lot of energy and a lot of anxiety, a lot of natural anxiety.
Right. Yeah, like in the animal kingdom, right? Like there's a chase and there's a kill or whatnot. And then the animal, the tiger, can like rest, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, eat and then maybe rest for a day. Who knows? Like that, then that's the part that we're not so good at, is the part about which we're going to talk about more, especially when we have a compromised vagus nerve, is like, how do we come down? How do we take the time to balance back out?
Yeah, such juicy stuff. And so why don't we just dive right into that? So, like, how does the vagus nerve come into play?
Yeah. So it's the 10th nerve of 10th cranial nerve, and it is part of our automatic nervous system, which is basically two parts of that. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, and freeze, which we talk about a lot, right? That's our stress response. And then the other side of that is the parasympathetic, or the rest and digest state. So how it plays into that is the vagus nerve is controlling the parasympathetic nervous system. So again, our rest and digest state. And it's actually the only nerve with the ability to decrease our stress. Pretty crazy, right? So it starts in the brain, okay? And the vagus nerve travels all the way to the gut. But on the way there, it has so many connections, okay? It's actually in Latin, it's actually the word vagus nerve is wandering, or means wandering. And so you can think about it like wandering through, and it's going to basically go through the heart, the liver, the pancreas, gallbladder, kidneys, spleen, lungs, like actually almost all of our organs. So no other nerve in the body has such broad and far-reaching effects as the vagus nerve. And so it's really critical. So it regulates critical functions of those organs, right? So like the heartbeat, the heart rate, the blood pressure, sweating, digestion, and so on. Breathing. So you can probably start to see already why this nerve might be really important. And when it's compromised, see how, because of all the connections that it makes, how when the vagus nerve is compromised, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that can really impact these organs and their functions. So what's really interesting is that only one part of the automatic nervous system can be activated at once. So if you're in stress mode or sympathetic state, which is, a lot of where we spend most of our time, if we're being honest, right? The body is actually unable to be in the parasympathetic. So not digesting. That's less time that we're in the mode of active, healthy digestion, detoxification, and healing. So only when stress ends can healing actually begin. And that's why we talk about being such an important part of our recovery, because we're dealing with the adrenals and maybe having the adrenals being compromised as well, where they're not reacting to stress as well. And, we've been kind of demanding so much cortisol being pumped out over, so many years and just being in a chronic state of stress that we actually have, it's no wonder why we're having all of these different symptoms, and why we really can't, I think where a lot of people get stuck and not healing is that they can't seem to turn off those various stressors or get to the root of those stressors. Does that make sense?
Thank you for sharing, Angela. That's so incredible. And it brings to light, sometimes on the recovery journey, a lot of us, like, this might be an area that we are kind of avoiding. Like, naturally, we want a magic pill to fix us, right? And so, or we want the supplement to kind of make our symptoms go away. But this is precisely why we preach over and over again that it's not just going to be a supplement. It's not going to be just a dietary tweak. You really have to look at your lifestyle as a whole and just see what's gotten you to the state of burnout that you're actually in the first place, right? Because if you're not willing to look at your lifestyle and those tendencies, this is exactly what you're saying. Like, you're not going to be able to address some of those stressors that have wound you up and got you here in the first place. So this can have many different faces, right?
Yes. And those patterns often, they're not easy to break, right? We know that. And that's what we do a lot with our clients in our programs, right? Is teaching us how to change those behaviors. We're habitual beings. So changing up those thought patterns, changing up the way that we respond to certain things, the way that we move throughout our day, it's just, we have a lot of patterns. So it is something that's hard to break, but it's an important part of the conversation, an important part of the recovery journey for sure.
Yeah. And just to throw out a couple nuggets there, and I know we're going to dive into this in more detail in just a moment, but things that that could be supportive. It could be dietary. It could be addressing your sleep and making yourself a priority and setting better boundaries and shifting your relationships. It could be changing the way that you work out. All of these things. It could be supplements, nourishing supplements. Like, all of these things play into your recovery, but oftentimes it's not the same for everybody. And that's why recovery is so individual. Like, the recovery process is so individual. And I didn't even mention the stuff that we're probably going to get into more, but like the work that you do, Angela, with mindset and breaking through some of those patterns when it comes to just like our emotional and mental health that can keep us stuck in a chronic state of stress. Some of those are unconscious, right? Like, a lot of those are unconscious.
A lot of them.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I wanted to ask how the cranial nerves could become compromised.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's definitely many ways that the vagus nerve can become compromised. And for instance, trauma, stressful situations in your life. But again, these are all physical, mental, emotional, abuse, addiction, divorce, death of a loved one, surgeries, illness, and even a high stress lifestyle where you have an addiction to incessant doing, addiction to stress. And that is, if you know my story, those of you who know my story, that's a big part of it, is just that addiction. To maybe not feeling good enough and feeling like you have to, keep going in order to feel good about yourself, and all of those things, are just getting used to being in the grind, which we're so used to, which we can get really addicted to in this society. So yeah. So really, it's any time in our lives we feel unsafe or we don't feel okay. So it's either like the experience has happened and we're repeating it and reliving it, right? Because of the trauma, right, that it's left on us and on our nervous system. Or it's like, so it's like either or, like you actually have the situation that's happened to you, and then you're maybe it's a repeated trauma, or you're just reliving it in your mind, for years, most often, right? Or decades.
So cool. So Angela, can you break down the vagus nerve and adrenal connection for our listeners?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, our life experiences, whether, the ones I just mentioned, trauma, abuse, having anxious parents, who knows, right, can create an overactive nervous system. And that, over time, again, can damage the vagus nerve. So when the vagus nerve is compromised, we don't have that stress decreasing nerve working for us, right, to activate the rest and digest state. Okay, so then on top of that, we have adrenals over here reacting to stress, right, helping us by pumping out cortisol and other hormones to help us respond to stress. And over time, the adrenals can't keep up. So if the vagus nerve is compromised, you get trapped in a sympathetic overdrive for majority of your life. This is kind of, I'm repeating myself, but this idea that we can't actually, we feel so wired, right? It's that feeling of feeling wired, and that we can't actually turn the switch off. It becomes very hard. Okay, so when you're in the sympathetic state, we have to remember that the connection is that things like, it inhibits our the job of our stomachs to do their work, the intestines to work properly and optimally, right? So that's when we start to see issues with digestion over time, gut issues, and we know how that, all that, how just the gut and the importance of the gut in the health puzzle, comes into play. So so again, we're getting trapped there, and then the organs that and their functions are being compromised as well. So in order to allow your organs in your body to be functioning optimally, you can take all the supplements in the world, but it's not going to help unless you also learn how to rewire your nervous system. And the way to do this is by toning and activating, again, the vagus nerve, so that so it can work optimally. And remember, that's an important job. It needs to activate the rest and digest state, which is actually where you can start to begin your healing. That's the most important part.
And I love that the visual of this really like long nerve traveling through our body and how it touches all of like our different organs and glands. Like it literally has its hands everywhere. And so
Absolutely.
It's cool to think about resting that and activating it, I should say, activating, resting our body and getting into that state where our vagus nerve is really doing its thing, and how that can correlate to benefits for our thyroid, for our adrenals, for our gut, like for all these different organs and glands, for our liver and brain, of course. But it's cool to imagine it kind of like having its paws on each and every part of our organ system.
Absolutely. And that's really what some of the stuff that, when I'm working with clients, is just teaching people how to be calm and peaceful in their bodies. I mean, it can seem so simple, right? But it's not. It's just not. And I know from personal experience. So,
I mean, if it were easier, it would be easier to go there. But that is why this work is so powerful. And what's cool about it is you start to tap into it and you start to like activate your vagus nerve and to practice these things that actually calm your body down. And it has a snowball effect in the way that it supports not only how you feel and not only how you sleep and not only how you digest food, but also your hormones as well. And it's crazy how quickly things can change And just one example is like how things can change if you had one night of good sleep compared to like another night of poor sleep, how you'll feel the next day. And in terms of how you're going to react to stress the next day, just having maybe doing some of these exercises that I know you're going to share with us in a little bit, before bed that night, that just calms you and kind of got you that better sleep. It's so cool. That's why this is so important. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Me too. And when you started talking about that cascade, it's like, it reminds me of actually when you find yourself on the opposite end, right? When you're actually going through the beginning of your journey where you're coming to burnout, like how quickly things can just start to snowball out of control, right? The same thing with healing. Like when you really start to get to the root, things can actually happen very quickly. And when I say that about my healing, I don't think people always like, when I say that I had such a remarkable, like quick, I consider quick, like 3 months, I had like such a big change in my recovery when I started to work at like very holistically on my journey. It's like it was 3 months before I was like, oh my gosh, my whole life feels like it changed, like a switch went on and it was just like boom, 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 everything fell into place. I'm not saying that happens for everybody, but that's the power of when you're able to bring in the piece of like, of really toning the vagus nerve and making like your body feel safe and calm again. When you bring that into play and you're good at it and you practice it, you cultivate that, it can just, like you said, you'll sleep better, you'll make better choices as far as nutrition, right? Like they're just the snowball of recovery, just the floodgates open. There you go.
Yes. And I love that. And I know, Angela, when you were going through your journey, you had a lot of support. And I resonate too, because when I had I kind of have a similar story with my recovery too. And I had a lot of support. And now doing this work that we do with our clients, it's almost like it can be way easier than you imagine. And I think when we're get caught in that state of chronic stress, like it's so easy to overcomplicate so many things. And I'm just thinking of some examples in my own life, like when I was recovering, where I needed a little bit of tough love. Like you get caught in these spirals and negativity, and having a coach to kind of help pull you out and shake and reframe some of those mindsets or those spins you might be in when you're in them was really, really important. And I know that we see that work now when we do it with our clients today. It's so easy when you're caught in that state of stress, like to make really big deals of everything, or looking for certain diagnoses that may or may not be there. Like there's a lot of things that can get caught up in the chaos that keep us like really wound up, and having somebody there to guide you out of that on a consistent basis, I think is huge. And that's why like talk therapy and that energy work, it is something that is so important in part of a recovery protocol. Sometimes the work that people don't want to do, but it's because it's not the easy work to do. Like it's easy to take a supplement. It's easy to pop smash ashwagandha, right? But this is a little bit more challenging.
Absolutely. And I have to say, like, if I was going to attribute my healing to any one thing, it would be like the hard love I got about like, you need to change the way that you move through your life, which is basically like, slow down, sister,
Yes.
take a deep breath. And it's funny because I say that, but like, I was studying to be a yoga teacher at the time. And so, even people that practice mindset and mindfulness and yoga, like it still happens. It happens to all of us. So that's why it takes like somebody stepping, kind of putting the pause button and say, okay, let's look at this. How are you moving through your life that's stressing you out? So doing personal inventory and really being able to look at it, like, what are your biggest stressors, and what are the shifts that you need to make in order to, love up your vagus nerve, have a toned vagus nerve, so you can tap into that rest and digest state often, many, many times throughout the day.
I love it. And before we move on, because we've got some really good questions lined up here, I love that you said hard love. And it just kind of made me think most of my breakthroughs, whether it was hard love I gave myself or hard love coming from a coach, like my biggest breakthroughs and my biggest, I would say, successes and progress in my recovery, and even in life in general, I feel like business and career, like, is often on the other side of the hard love. So
Absolutely.
just remembering it's coming from a place of love.
Mm-hmm.
whether it's from you or your coach or, your practitioner. But so important, especially for those who have been struggling for a long time, because there's probably a lot of stories attached to your situation.
Yeah.
But Angela, you mentioned the vagus nerve and the gut connection. So I just wanted to circle back there because I know that's huge. And honestly, that truly could probably be a podcast in itself.
Yes.
But I just wanted to ask if you could briefly just touch on that before we move on.
Yes, I would love to bring someone else on to come and talk about this. So do like a part 2 of the gut connection, because I think it's so big. But yeah, I'll just brushstroke on it. So the vagus nerve, they also refer to as the gut-brain axis. So it's a two-way highway. You could think about it this way, where the vagus nerve sends messages in both directions, from the gut to the brain to the gut. And 80% of the information transmitted via the vagus nerve travels from the body to the brain, which I kind of thought was interesting. And then 20% of that is from the brain to the body. So it just brings true, and we're about to talk about some exercises to help you tone that vagus nerve. It just brings light to the idea that there is a two-way communication happening. And so it's not just about like thinking happy thoughts, right? And having a good mindset. It is actually about doing things that in your body and how you hold your body, right? How you position your body. If you're calm, if you're rushing through the day, like how those things can also signal, right, to the brain that you're not okay or you're not safe. And then vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It can be important to do both of those types of things to tone your vagus nerve and find a place of calm.
And if I could just bring in one connection, if you don't mind, Angela, but just even people who suffer with depression and anxiety, one of the symptoms of that tends to be IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome. So you might experience like gut issues or loose stools in the morning, this kind of upset belly. But studies are more starting to show that gut issues in themselves has such an enormous link to our mood, right? And so this is why this is such a big topic, but you can see how not having optimized gut health, which is something that a lot of people who come to us and in our community are kind of dealing with. Like the gut issues create stress on so many levels, including the adrenals. So it's always a foundation that we start with, but so profound for the mood. And just to understand that if you do struggle with anxiety and depression, there is a pathway of communication there. And a lot of the messages like being received by your brain are actually coming from your gut. So the healthier your gut, the better you're going to feel.
And mentally too.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating? I just think this stuff is the coolest. I mean, it's so important for us to learn about, because we've never been told this stuff before, right? It's like, this is fairly new information, or at least being broadcasted to, kind of the world, and understanding this brain gut connection. But how, if you struggle with anxiety, especially if you didn't really have it as a child, like there could be a root level like gut issue going on, right? That could be it could be the source. So that 100%. To me is fascinating. Thank you for adding that. I love it.
So how do we stimulate and tone the vagus nerve? How do we optimize it so that it just serves us as best as it possibly can?
Yeah. So I want to give a few examples, but at the heart of it, I want you to understand that it's really about anything that brings you calm, anything that helps you switch on like the wired light bulb, right? Switch it off in order for you to feel calm and safe in your body. So these are just suggestions. I mean, some of these have some scientific backing, but I just wanted to share, like, that is the most important. It's like, what brings you calm? Because it's so individual. So a few examples of how to actually activate, though, like the vagus nerve, is of course deep and slow breathing. Okay. So of course, this is going to send a signal to your brain and the vagus nerve to lower your heart rate and your blood pressure, and again, make you feel safe in your body. So, I recommend this idea of diaphragmatic breathing, or 3-part breath, that I teach in my yoga classes. It's essentially, if you think about just like finding your belly button, and right below that, that's where you want to initiate your breath. That, like, inhale you're going to like blow up your belly and then your rib cage like a balloon, and then your chest rises. That's what you want to think about. And let the diaphragm do its natural, like what it's meant to do, which is flatten on the inhale and allow the lungs to fill more fully. Because we're not filling our lungs completely these days. And so that again has its own affecting, that's another podcast. But so that's a really important part. Okay, so probably feel like you've heard this time and time again, breathe slow, but it's one of those really simple tools that you can use, and just hopefully that gives you some motivation. So number one. Number two is singing, humming, or chanting. There's a lot to be said for sound healing too. People that actually feel like the need to create sound in their body to heal. It's kind of a beautiful thing. And I think that this is a good example of how singing, humming, chanting can be very healing and relaxing, hope for some people, right? Gargling is going to have that same effect. So there's another, I'm just going to kind of lump that in the category of singing, humming, chanting, gargling, kind of that same idea of activating the muscles at the back of the throat. And number three would be just actually moving your body through exercise or getting a massage. Just other great ways to, of course, calm the body, right? So one more thing I want to share with you is this idea that calming your body can just be as simple as finding a simple word or phrase that is calming to you. So this will be my fourth tip for you. And this is just coming up with a word that does bring you calm. So I just want you to think about that for a moment. Could be just calm. Or if you're someone like me who just likes to move fast and talk fast and just all those things, slow or slow down.
I like that one. I'm like you, so that resonates.
Peace. Or I am safe, or I am grounded, right? We talk about those mantras or those affirmations. So whatever would help you in the moment when you're feeling intense, like you're in the moment, you're in an intense, stressful moment, can you think about what might make you feel calm? And then I'd like you to just practice using it even when it doesn't count, and just saying the words to you and seeing if it brings you calm. And then you can start to bring it in to your everyday life when you start to feel that intensity, the buildup, or the wired feeling, and see if you can create that shift for yourself.
That's beautiful. I love that. As a fast-paced person, I really liked the slow one. But I think that these are all so helpful and a great way, some great tidbits for you to take away and integrate into your own life after listening to this conversation. So I truly hope this has served. Angela, I'm so grateful for your wisdom on this topic and for your great tips and kind of clearing some stuff up for us about the vagus nerve, because you're right, it does wander, it does reach a lot of places, and it can feel, the nervous system in general can feel really complicated. And when it comes to thinking about how to calm down our nervous system, there's so many things out there that we could seemingly do, but I love coming back to these simple foundations and these tools that are kind of available to us no matter where we are. They're with us in the car, they're with us on our walks, while we're at work, while we're with the kids. Yeah. So it's just using these simple tools and remembering what you said, like it truly can be so much more simple than you may have ever imagined. And if you need support finding that for yourself, that's something we'd be honored to support you with. So check the link in our bio or in the show notes for a little bit more information about our recovery programs, because we'd love to support you with that. But thank you again, Angela, for this conversation.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate it. It was really, really fun. And I love how you just said it. It can be very simple. So don't overcomplicate, and then don't make this work also like more stress for you, right? So I hope, take these 4 tips, pick one that you think that sounds fun for you to play with, and start playing with bringing your body into a place of feeling safe and okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela.